Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Well, last week was Shabbat Chazon, when we read from the first chapter of the prophet Isaiah, a vision, Chazon, the vision of Isaiah, which bitterly condemns the Israelite people for somehow coming to the belief that if they simply followed all of the ritual commandments and the sacrificial commandments of the Torah, then they would be in good shape with God and they could blithely ignore the moral and ethical teachings of the very same Torah. An angry passage leading to Wednesday evening was Tisha B'Av. And we observe the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, by reading the book of Lamentations, which is, Sefer Echa, the book of Echa. And actually, we don't read Echa. We chant it with one of the most haunting of all of the trope systems. Those trope markings successfully convey the horrific images of Jerusalem's destruction. True confession, I am viscerally attached to Tisha B'Av. It grabs hold of my soul each and every year, and it will never let go. So Reese and I listened to the chanting of Echa virtually from our local congregation, and then through the awesome power of internet links, we heard and watched Echa being chanted at the Kotel at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Those familiar words, that familiar haunting chant, that very familiar setting. I felt myself sitting again by the waters of Babylon, remembering, weeping, mourning for what I had lost, for what we had lost. It was an overpowering experience. Now, this Saturday is Shabbat Nahamu, the Shabbat that follows Tisha B'Av, the Shabbat in which we read as the Haftarah, chapter 40 of the book of Isaiah, which begins, Nahamu, Nahamu Ami, called Shabbat Nahamu, Nahamu, Nahamu Ami, an imperative, go out, comfort, comfort my people. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Haftarah. Tell my people that their sufferings are over. Now our Sedra this week, our Torah portion is V'etchanan, Deuteronomy, beginning with chapter 3, verse 23 and following. Whenever one hears the phrase an embarrassment of riches, well, among other things, think of V'etchanan. For example, chapter 5, we just have Aseret HaDibrot, the second rendering of a version of the 10 Commandments. And chapter 6, we just happen to have the Shema and the V'ahavta. It's also there, plus foundational elements in the construction of the Haggadah for Passover. And there's so much more. Truly, fair, an embarrassment of riches. But I want to take a different path with us this morning. I want to turn with you to a magnificent passage in the Midrash that uniquely addresses us on Shabbat Nahamu. Now, giving credit where credit is due, I want to thank Rabbi Dr. Tamar Ashkenazi for having gently pointing me in this direction. The particular Midrash collection we are going to visit is called Pesikta de Rav Kahana. Now, Pesikta is a homily, a little sermon, a discourse. And our text can be dated to approximately the 6th century of our era. We're not actually sure who Rav Kahana was. There are 4 or 5 of them, but no matter. Pesikta de Rav Kahana. This homily, this sermon, grapples with the theme and the purposes of Shabbat Nahamu. And it's not an argument, right? Rather, it's a call to each and every one of us to be aware of what is going on, what is being called for in the text. Now, I'm going to share the Midrash. It'll be in my paraphrase. The true difference between a poor person and a rich person has nothing to do, the Midrash says, with comparative wealth. To be truly poor is to be lacking in Torah. To be truly wealthy is to be a student of Torah. One who lacks Torah can be identified by their distance from truth. The deepest faith and the deepest truth are hidden from the ignorant. Such people are totally poor. Now, some may move toward faith by reciting the Shema, others by contemplating their mortality. Both approaches can bring people closer to God, but they do so more out of fear than out of a possession of the truth. One needs to rise higher. One needs to abandon any commitment to focusing just on ourselves and to focus on what is true in our world. Faith and truth can become one, and when they do, we are wealthy. One who lacks love and reverence is like a lonely wanderer crossing the earth with no sense as to where they have been or to where they're going. Such a person is cut off from higher qualities. Such a person is cut off from their roots. Such a person is cut off from their soul. In life, our Midrash continues. We are pulled in many directions. Our very physicality, our materiality, they try to cripple our noblest qualities. But we are not trapped in such a setting. An embrace of the world of Torah can allow us to respond to those highest qualities and to choose to live an exemplary life. But that's not enough. Not nearly enough. Not only must we lead an exemplary life, we must set examples for others to follow. We can and must actively seek to bring others to follow us in living a life of truth and of faith. The Midrash goes on. The Haftarah text says, Nahamu, Nahamu. We are commanded to bring comfort to our people. But true comfort, true consolation can only be embraced by those who see life as far larger than that which touches them personally. When we live a life of truth, when we live a life in which our noblest qualities are exemplified, then and only then can we actively set examples for others and bring them consolation. And how important is it to bring transformative comfort to others? Is that important? Remember, our psikta, the sermon, the Midrash ends. Remember, there can be no king without a people. Think about that. There can be no king without a people. God's very capacity to function in our world depends upon how we respond to the imperative, comfort ye, my people, by setting noble examples. The call to live a life of truth, a life marked by living a virtuous existence, a life of faith. God needs us to live such a life. End of the Midrash. God needs us to be comforters. with texts of surpassing power, our Torah portion, Ve'et Hanan, sets out the terms of relationship between God and our people. So in the text, we are called Am Segula, a particular treasured people. Our part of the eternal covenant is to observe the statutes and commandments and regulations and exhortations found within the Torah. And in response, God, the text says, will cleave to us. A fascinating expression. God will cleave to us when we fulfill what is demanded of us. But being true to God in the Torah text, it's made clear, is more than just observing all 613 ritual and ethical commandments. More. Be sure to keep God's commandments, we find in our Sedra. Yes, be sure to keep the 613, of course. But then these words appear. Va'asita hayashar v'hatov be'enei Adonai. Do the yashar, the upright, the straight, v'hatov, and the good, those which appear to be good and straight in the eyes of God. And here, the Haftarah Nahamu and our Sedra Ve'et Hanan and our Midrash meld together. God needs us to be more than followers of rules just so that we avoid punishment. Doing the rules is a lower form of truth. But when we choose to do what is right and what is good, we become exemplars, we become role models, we begin to influence the lives of others to modify their behavior. And our Midrash reminds us that God, the eternal, the ineffable, depends upon us becoming such role models, because only when we do so can God become God. Okay, that's it for this Shabbat. Powerful. Have a safe and beautiful weekend. Don't forget that the so-called Jewish Valentine's Day, Tu B'Av, begins this Tuesday evening. Be an exemplar so God can become God. Shabbat Shalom.